listening to Purplish is one way that you keep up on the news. CPR has been cooking up a new podcast to give you the statewide news you need every weekday. And you can get a special preview of this new podcast at an event at CPR's future headquarters in Denver on February 25th. Check out the show notes to today's episode of Purplish for more details. Hope to see you there February 25th.
Yara Zokai is usually eager to volunteer in her kids' classrooms and happy to bear the title of room mom.
So I plan the winter party, Valentine's Day, the Halloween party, and I take it too seriously.
She also goes, quote, all out for birthday parties for her 3 kids and husband, and decorating her home in Fort Collins for whatever the next holiday is. When I visited, Valentine's Day was several weeks away. This year, Zokai can't be in her son's classrooms to cut out paper hearts and hand out snacks.
I'm giving that up now because I realized that I can't pass all my bills, spend time with my kids, see my husband, travel back and forth, and plan a Valentine's Day party. So, but that crushed me to say, I'm going to have to give up something, and I think it's the Valentine's Day party.
Zokai sacrificed school party planning for committee hearings and bill proposals. She's learning to navigate disagreements at the state capitol, kind of like she does at home sometimes.
What's up?
You're sitting on the crafted chair. Mommy, you're sitting on the attacking me.
Yo, hey,
just
look at
like
me.
I said.
Could you not touch Remy, please?
Yeah.
This is Zokai's first year as a lawmaker, and she's not alone. Nearly a third of House members are new to the Statehouse this year. It's a demanding job with a steep learning curve. In Zokai's house, it's been an adjustment for everyone, including her kids.
She says she's gonna be home at a certain time.
This is Zokai's 5-year-old middle son, Roman.
But then by that time, it takes another 3 hours for her to get home.
And that was a real accurate take on what it's like to have me work at the Capitol. I'll say I'll be home, and then it's 3 hours later.
And she knows that as the session goes on, those 3-hour delays are likely to get more frequent and run even longer. It's definitely tough for her to think about being away from her family so much, but it's also her family and the challenges they've faced that motivated her to run for office in the first place.
Everyone who runs for public office gets into it for a reason, and everyone who serves finds out the reality has its own challenges and surprises. But session after session, new lawmakers keep arriving at the Capitol, each putting their own stamp on Colorado. This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capitol News Alliance, a show about Colorado politics, policy, and the 2025 state legislature. I'm Benta Birkeland.
And I'm Lucas Brady Woods with KUNC News. There are lots of new faces at the Colorado State Capitol this session, and they're all getting used to what life is like under the Gold Dome.
It's not unusual to see a lot of new names in the State House, especially after an election. Term limits mean lawmakers can spend at most 8 consecutive years in each chamber.
But the number of new state representatives this year is notable. Around a third of the 65 people who serve in the House are new to their jobs.
We wanted to get a better sense of what it was like to be a newbie legislator, how they start to figure out the inner workings of the Capitol.
We were curious why they wanted to do the job in the first place and to hear their thoughts as they learned the ropes.
Newcomers come from all walks of life and bring all sorts of experiences to their new jobs. And their perspectives, taking it all in, can be a window into the state capitol that can help all of us better understand the people that are meant to be the voice for Coloradans, but also pass laws that have such an impact on their daily lives.
Johnson.
One of those new members I want to introduce you to is Representative Dusty Johnson. She's from Fort Morgan, which is on the Eastern Plains, and I met up with her on opening day. This is when the chamber's really crowded and everyone has their friends and family there. And she said she was really eager to get through the ceremonial aspects.
Feeling really excited, and it's just so close. It's the anticipation of I want to start working for my people, knowing that for policy and stuff, I'm not quite sworn in yet. So I'm just waiting for those couple more minutes.
after she's sworn in, that's when she's officially a lawmaker and can start doing everything she was elected to do. And at age 29, she's the youngest lawmaker serving this session. And it's by a pretty slim margin, because I was asking her, are you the youngest then? And she actually had to do some of her own reporting. She had to cross-check birthdays with a few of her colleagues just to be sure.
That's the serious conversation of how old are you, and let's see how much older I am of you. Because I've already done that with Ryan Gonzalez, and I have him by 3 months for youngest.
When Johnson was telling this story, she was with her grandparents, who came to the Capitol to watch her officially get sworn into office. And then we all walked across the street after the ceremony and swearing in where her office is. She's in a building where a lot of lawmakers have their offices, and they were just all so excited for her.
It was a new experience for me, but we were just proud to be here with our granddaughter.
Yeah, it's exciting for her to achieve this, and I hope she has a great career.
Even though she's young, Johnson's actually been involved in Republican politics in eastern Colorado for a while, but this is her first time ever holding an elected office. Was it something you expected she may do, or?
Well, she told us since she was about 5 that she was going to do it, so we expected it.
Oh, so you did want to be a state lawmaker or go into politics?
President.
Yeah, president's the end goal. So since I was 4 or 5, I've had a pathway to an office.
Then at this point, we're in her office, and her mom, Christine, jumps in to explain that her daughter has just always had a passion for politics.
She has been a Reagan fan, I think at a very young age, probably 5th grade. She had memorized all of the presidents, could tell them to you in order. She could give you facts. She was throwing things out all the time, and it's just always been her passion.
And just to note, there's a portrait of President Reagan hanging in her new office. There's also a lot of elephant things, like stuffies and just different figurines. And of course, the elephant is tied to the Republican Party. But Johnson says her obsession is just coincidental.
But I loved elephants before I knew about politics because of Dumbo. So it just happens to be my favorite animal as well. And so it's perfect to do everything around that.
We picked these 2 representatives to follow, Zokai and Johnson, because their experiences capture so many elements of what it means to be a state lawmaker, and also because they come from 2 very different political backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Johnson represents one of the most rural and the reddest part of the state. To get things passed, she's in the minority party. She's really going to have to find common ground with Democrats.
On the other hand, Zokai, who's a Democrat, is a first-generation Iranian-American. She's a Democrat from a college town and campaigned on issues like lowering the cost of living, protecting reproductive rights, and boosting education funding.
I mean, one thing that's nice and makes things interesting at the State House is that we have 100 lawmakers from all different backgrounds, different parts of the state, driven by different things. But at some point, they all decided they have what it takes to be a state lawmaker. And I guess I was kind of surprised because I didn't expect to hear that Dusty Johnson had had these political aspirations for almost all of her life.
It's pretty cool. She knew what she wanted to do and is actually on the path to achieving it.
So, Lucas, I have to ask, what did your 5-year-old self want to do? Because I wanted to be a professional ballerina. So my 5-year-old self would not be happy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I wanted to be a paleontologist, so also probably wouldn't be as happy with my career. But, there's some similarities there. While it is really incredible that Johnson is on the path that she really set out to do and is doing what she wanted to do, it hasn't always been that easy, though, for her.
Yes, that's right. I mean, she's doing well now career-wise and everything, but growing up in the Fort Morgan area, her family definitely went through some real hardships.
We were homeless a couple times because my mom was a single mom. Everything I've been through, I think, better fosters me to be a unified voice for my constituents and even across the state. With the rural lens in mind that we have less resources, and that very much hit home every single time.
Another big thing that's really shaped who she is her health. Johnson was a big soccer player growing up, but she said when she was 19, her right leg just, as she describes it, started giving out. Was suddenly really weak. It became completely numb. And then when she could have feeling again, it would be excruciating pain. And she said doctors for a pretty long time could not figure out what the problem was.
It took almost a year and a half to get diagnosed correctly with the tumor that I had 9 total surgeries, and the tumor would come back within 2-3 weeks to a couple months.
Doctors told Johnson the tumor was very aggressive and it was damaging her bone, ligaments, tendons, muscles. So when all these surgeries didn't work, she then had to do a 1.5 years of chemotherapy.
Wow, that is really intense.
Yeah, and she had all these ambitious plans. She'd been accepted to West Point, and instead, the tumor just kind of derailed everything. She was in and out of hospitals, and her insurance required her to go through all these steps before she could get certain treatments. So, for instance, they were pushing for her to get her leg amputated above the knee. Ultimately, she was eventually able to get them to cover a knee replacement instead, but it was a real struggle.
It affected my mental health. I was not in a good place. I will say that willingly because I think the biggest thing is to end the stigma. It's okay not to be okay.
She spent around 7 years dealing with all of this and said all these experiences with the healthcare system, the insurance companies, and everything she's gone through is just given her this unique lens and perspective. She has this firsthand experience that a lot of lawmakers don't have.
Some people said, you're only 29, you're elected. I'm like, I've had a ton of life experience in a short amount of time.
And this is already shaping some of her legislative priorities. I'm curious, what did you learn about Representative Zokai and some of her experiences?
So similar to Johnson, Zokai's approach to politics is really influenced by her own life experiences. First of all, being a mom comes up a lot when you talk to her, and that makes sense because she just had her third child last year while she was in the middle of her campaign, I might add. And I got to meet her kids on opening day of the legislative session because she brought them in for her swearing in.
On opening day, when we were voting on who should be speaker, my wonderful 5-year-old almost voted for the minority leader to be Speaker of the House, and I caught his finger. He was like, I want to push the red button. I was like, no, we are voting for Julie McCluskey, my friend. It's that middle child. You got to watch out.
That would have been a fun opening day story twist of new Democratic lawmaker votes for Republican for speaker. So I could see that headline.
Oh yeah, me too. It would be pretty funny if her kid picked the Republican for speaker. Clearly, both being a mom and serving her community in the State House are both really important to Zokai. For example, she's sponsoring a bill to require insurance companies to cover the cost of replacing a car seat after an accident. And she says there's one word that really guides her focus.
I am a tax attorney, community organizer, and most importantly, I am a mom to 3 little boys. And I have spent the last 2 years knocking doors, phone banking, holding town halls, and the issue that comes up again and again is affordability.
That was Zokai at a press conference a few weeks ago introducing her big bill of the session. This bill would give the Attorney General more power to investigate potential price gouging, especially in necessities like groceries, which she says she feels trying to feed her own family of 5.
You've asked me about the experience of stepping into this role. I think one of the weirdest things is that we kind of lose that connection of what's happening in this building is you will talk to those interests that will tell you that everybody hates this and no one thinks it's real. And then I'll go do a town hall and I'll have 100 people talking to me about the cost of their groceries and how excited they are about this bill. And there's a real disconnect between what happens in the Capitol and what's happening outside.
Colorado, like a lot of states, doesn't have a full-time year-round legislature. So the idea is to have regular citizens who spend 4 months at the Capitol and then the rest of the year are out living in their community, with the idea that that will help lawmakers not lose this connection.
I think that's core to why Zokai really wants to hold on to her perspective as a young parent and maintain her connection to her kids and her family back home, because she really wants to make sure she doesn't lose sight of what's important and why she's doing this job.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance. Okay, so we've gotten to know these lawmakers a little bit better and hear some of the specific life experiences they're bringing to their work. So now let's shift to what it's like to do that work itself. We've been checking in with each of them over the last month or so as they've settled into the Capitol. And Lucas, how's it been going for Zokai?
I know it's been tough for her at times. She doesn't want to be away from her kids during the week, so she's commuting back and forth all the way from Fort Collins to Denver.
And that's not a drive that's easy, especially in the winter.
Definitely not. But she doesn't feel like she has any other choice.
I do not have the money to buy a second home or to rent a second home, and because I have little kids and I want to get home and see them. So it's a different experience than maybe people who are local and are here, or for most legislators who are further out, who are able to, have the means to have another home out here.
She knows she's going to be pulling some long hours in Denver, particularly as contentious policy proposals come up later in the session. But that's why she has a sofa sleeper in her office at the Capitol.
I'm not necessarily planning to spend nights in my office, but if I ever need a nap, I'm really excited about this couch.
So let's check back with her late April, and I hope for all of our sakes she's not crashing overnight on that sofa. It's something Democratic leaders have said they're trying to do less of. They're more open to working weekends as a way to cut down on these overnight hours. Not that it will not happen. They just want to try to minimize it as much as possible. Because, who really wants to be up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning and then back at work at 9 a.m.? I don't think anyone is their best self.
But here's hoping that's more the anomaly than the norm. And working weekends is going to be hard on Zokai in a different way. When they work weekends, she's going to lose those days with her kids.
And I think it's something everyone who runs for the statehouse does have to weigh. It's a third of the year, yes, but during that time, it can be very nonstop.
Yep.
Especially if lawmakers are ambitious and end up sponsoring a lot of big bills.
Right, and lots of employers talk about work-life balance as a way to get good people to work for them, but that's not something the legislature really offers. You really have to be okay with missing out on a lot of other things to be able to do this job.
If you're a lawmaker whose district isn't an easy drive to Denver, it does get harder. I mean, Zokai is kind of in a tough spot because she can drive to Denver, but yet it's not very close. And it's similar for Representative Johnson. She lives a little more than an hour away from Denver. She's on a 5-acre plot of land near Fort Morgan, and she lives with her mom. And Johnson came up with a different solution. She's found an apartment near the state capitol building, so she can skip the long commute during the work week. But she said it's been an adjustment.
I don't sleep as well at night right now because there's so much noise. I'm used to hearing, aviation planes or tractors or cows. And now I'm hearing sirens and people talking on the other side of the room because I have now, neighbors, and I had acres of, land that I didn't have neighbors.
She did, though, bring a piece of home with her to Denver. She brought her dog Peaches, and Peaches is also adjusting to city life.
I keep hearing about Peaches. Tell me more about this dog.
Yes, so Peaches is a cute little ball of fluff. I don't really have any sound of Peaches because Peaches is so quiet when I tried to put the microphone there, but she's a Shih Tzu Lhasa Apso mix. That's like my 5th take of trying to say that.
You did it.
But she stays with Johnson throughout the week, and Johnson said she's just the most well-behaved of her dogs. Her other dog, one is a farm dog, and the other barks all the time. But Peaches is doing really well.
As much as she hates the city and all of the honking and the noises, she is thriving and getting all of the attention and being told she's a good girl every day, and still begging and then them giving, but technically stealing people's lunches and stuff.
So she's not completely well-behaved, but I think that's okay. And Benta, from what you've said, Peaches isn't just a pet, right?
That's right. Johnson got Peaches for mental health support during her chemo.
Well, I can't wait to personally meet this dog. And it sounds like Peaches could even be maybe what builds some bipartisan bridges across the aisle? I don't know. I already know there's a few other dogs in the Capitol that are very cute. There's Pippin, Rep. McCormick's Golden Retriever. There's Hank, Rep. Wilford's Little White Terrier, I think. I'm no expert here. And of course, my personal favorite, because he looks like my dog, Rep. Armagos' amazing Pit Mix, Tyson. Even the governor brings his dog sometimes.
With quite a few dogs, or at least a handful of dogs, Johnson has a little idea for that. She wants to start a dog caucus.
Oh, man.
Kind of an online account, Instagram account, so lawmakers could share pictures of their pets.
There's so much tension here, as you're aware. Just kind of taking pictures randomly and letting everyone have access to an Instagram or something and posting the hard questions of, is this fair or right or legal that, my human can give me half a treat and I see a full treat in their hand? Or this is the best spot to sniff around the Capitol don't go here, this is my spot. It's just something to add humor to the experience. Ideally, just work across the divide because dogs unite people, and we're going to need all those relationships we can get this year.
Peaches and Johnson are adjusting to everything, the long hours, the noise downtown Denver. But Johnson says the biggest shift for her has actually been her title, because she's not a newbie at the Capitol. She worked as a legislative aide for several years, including most recently Republican Senator Rod Pelton. And legislative aides, it's an administrative job. They're in the building managing calendars, answering constituent questions, organize town halls, research, draft bills. And she really knows the work lawmakers do. But she said she's just not used to how in demand she is now.
I will walk out of the chamber and there are 7 to 8 people trying to get my attention at the same time. And so I'm allowing time. If I made the joke, it actually took 40 minutes to get from the chamber to the elevator.
For someone like me who's not in as high demand, I'd have to say, I just hope people aren't sprinting away as I'm trying to ask them a question. But this 40-minute walk, it's basically 15 seconds.
Yeah, we do this walk all the time. I do it almost every day. It's essentially this elevated area right outside the House chamber, which is literally where all the lobbyists hang out. It's the lobby of the House chamber. And that's because they're not allowed inside and they can ask questions about bills, which is, why they talk to lawmakers.
And now that Johnson is a lawmaker, lobbyists are really vying for her attention. And she says she feels that stark power dynamic shift because she has this lawmaker badge on.
It's definitely different to have a title. I would joke that as an aide, you're on the, you'd stay against the wall, you're seen, not heard. You can move in and out with no one really noticing.
And interestingly, Johnson does a lot of things for herself, and she likes to do that. So her legislative aide doesn't walk her dog, doesn't manage her calendar, doesn't get her coffee, doesn't schedule interviews. In fact, her aide only works full-time in her district, not inside the Capitol. I've never heard of this before.
He's amazing. His name is Josh. He'll go to events for me that I can't make, which I think is more important than him being here, because then I still have that open ear out there.
So it does sound like a fun job, but a much different experience not being at the Capitol and seeing how the legislative process works up close.
That's funny. She was an aide before, so maybe she has a better sense of how to do without one now. And it's an interesting point that she's prioritizing having someone her constituents can interact with directly in her district since it's so far from Denver.
One thing that stands out as we talk about these two lawmakers in particular is that they're both young women. Zokai isn't quite as young as Johnson. Johnson is the youngest member this session, but they're still pretty young. And that's a change from when I first started covering the Capitol a long, long time ago.
Well, that's really interesting. Benta, I don't know what you heard from Johnson, but Zokai says it's still pretty tough for young parents.
I feel really privileged that I can do this, and I took a massive pay cut to be able to do it, and it definitely hurts. And it is a huge barrier. There are a lot of people who can't serve because of the low pay.
For context, Colorado lawmakers make about $48,000 a year. And for some people, that can be a lot of money. But for someone like Zokai with a family of 5, that kind of salary can also be kind of a balancing act.
It's a part-time legislature, but for a lot of them, it basically is a full-time job. And even if you were just to focus on it during the 4-month session, how many employers are okay if you take 4 months off every year?
It feels very much designed for people who are wealthy or retired, and then our laws reflect those values instead of the perspective of young families. And that's why I do think it's really important that people with young families and who are younger and who have student loan debt, that they're in that building and sharing those perspectives.
Zokai says the only way she's able to do the job at all is because her husband is also an attorney and his salary can support the family.
This is definitely a point of tension when you have a citizen or part-time legislature. The public doesn't necessarily want to pay lawmakers a huge amount of money, and then you get worried people are just doing it for the money, and where's that fine balance? And then it's their full-time job and they don't bring other work experiences into the chamber. But then if the pay is too low, it shuts out a lot of people who would have interesting and different perspectives. And then the laws are narrower.
But you did mention it seems like there are more younger lawmakers these days, right?
Definitely younger lawmakers, a lot of young parents on opening day All the kids that were in the chamber, all the lawmakers' kids were up there during like the Pledge of Allegiance or something. And there was so many kids.
Very cute.
Yeah. And I think the state has taken some steps to make it easier for people to serve. So they passed a law to create paid parental leave for lawmakers. They added a lactation room so women can pump or breastfeed, and it's for lobbyists too. And ever since COVID, lawmakers can also take remote votes. Any type of illness, it can help for parents or people who don't have kids, but they do have a little bit more flexibility, even though they're expected to be at the Capitol most days.
Speaking of lawmakers being human, it seems like a good time to transition talking about Johnson and Zokai's personal experience as lawmakers into what it's like to actually do this job.
It is cold. The snow hit. It is February, and it's about that time for winter to be winter.
The corner of Colorado Johnson's talking about here is the upper northeast part of the state. It's very rural, and because of that, very big. And I wasn't able to get out with her in her district, so I asked her to send me some recordings of what she's doing on the weekends, trying to represent this pretty big geographic area. So she sent me that voice memo, I think it was Saturday around midnight.
Now, mind you, I am pulled over right now at a gas station, but it is not abnormal for me to have late nights, early mornings with such a large landmass district, and the fact that I want to make sure I'm getting to a wide range of events, be it morning events, night events. With session, I'm not getting out to the district as much as I would want to, but making sure to take every moment in the weekend to get out here.
One of her top priorities is really to make sure rural communities don't get left behind. She's focused on boosting rural hospitals, making sure local pharmacies don't shut down. Water and agriculture are also big things in this district. Her first bill was trying to cut some bureaucratic red tape for permits to dig a water well, and it got a lot of support.
My bills has already gone unanimously out of the House to the Senate. I know that's not going to be a thing on everything. It's just nice to get that started, to have a good, my feet under me.
This might go without saying, but Johnson needs Democratic support to pass anything. But that doesn't mean Republicans don't run some bills just so they can get public hearings, of course, even though they'll fail, right?
That definitely happens quite a bit. I mean, lawmakers are allowed 5 bills each at minimum. And you will see bills every year from Republicans on things like rolling back gun laws, limiting abortion. Yes, those won't pass, but that's something their constituents support, and they want to have a public hearing on that issue. I will say, when I looked through Johnson's bill list so far, she isn't sponsoring anything on the social issue side of things or really controversial bills. Almost all of them are dealing with things like healthcare and rural needs, and the vast majority of her bills have Democratic sponsors. She'll definitely vote in favor of Republican proposals when she gets a chance. She represents, like we said, a very conservative district, but she's not introducing those bills at this point. Shifting to Zokai, though, she's in a much different situation as a member of the Democratic majority. How important is bipartisanship for her?
She probably doesn't need their votes, but I think she still sees the value of working across the aisle. She's working on one bipartisan bill, but embraces being a progressive Democrat at the end of the day. And all of the bills she's actually introduced so far only have Democratic sponsors. We talked earlier about her focus on the rising cost of living, and she's definitely trying to tackle that from the left.
I've spoken to parents who skip meals to make sure their kids can eat. I've heard the heartbreak of older adults who are choosing between groceries and making rent. I've met college students balancing jobs and school while still barely scraping by. Coloradans deserve better.
Within that, she's specifically concerned about corporations taking advantage of consumers for profit. That's where her anti-price gouging bill comes in. She feels like taking on wealthy special interests like corporations is a mandate that she ran on.
I'm happy to engage across the aisle, but I will say, for me, tax policy is a way to enforce economic justice. It's about having a progressive tax code, and it's about everybody paying in their fair share. And I have not had a lot of Republican partners join me in that endeavor, but I think they should.
It's important to note that there's a lot of Republican proposals for tax policy and really a whole slew of policies that Democrats will not get on board with. So I just think it goes both ways.
Definitely. And there's going to be fundamental differences on a lot of core issues. But I do think overall bipartisanship at the Colorado Capitol is one of the things that would often surprise people who aren't familiar with the legislature, especially if they're following national politics. And it's one thing lawmakers in both parties, by and large, really pride themselves on. They say Colorado is not D.C.
I think that's accurate. I think they realize that D.C.-style vitriol is just not something Colorado voters want to see. And Zokai said she's already noticed that there's really not the level of vitriol we see in Washington.
I've had really great conversations with Republican colleagues. It's not this divisive environment that you might imagine or that you see on the federal level.
I think one big difference is our lawmakers in Colorado are in the legislative chambers all day, every day. So they're mixing with each other every single second at the Capitol for the most part. And Representative Johnson said she's also started to try to take a lead with Democrats to do things like grabbing coffee, introducing them to peaches.
I get to know their kid or their spouse. Then people have come to me like, where are your hurt issues? I'm like, before we get there, I need to build the foundation of integrity, relations, respect, and then we dive into the harder.
And there have been some contentious bills already, but Johnson's been at the Capitol as an aide a long time to know that those tough debates are also still coming on a lot of things like immigration and transgender rights, and it could get pretty fiery on the House floor.
There's always those moments where things go off the rails for a bit each session, and I don't think we've seen the end of them this session.
Yes, I mean, that's to be determined. I know we'll be talking about it and covering it in the months and weeks ahead. Johnson said she does understand, though, Democrats have this very wide majority, and those disagreements are part of the process.
They're coming at it from one end. Their people elected them to do it. My people elected me maybe to do the opposite. How do we find the grace? And we actually did this in the Bible study that happens every Tuesday. We talked about how do we respect each other as colleagues, remove ourselves personally from the issue so we're not attacking the person who's sponsoring it or opposing it, and how do we actually address the issue in a good faith effort that actually gives respect to it.
I think she's pointing out two important things here, actually. There's bipartisan civility when they're debating contentious policy, and then there's actual bipartisan bills that end up coming out of the legislature. I think those are two different things.
Yes, and these are still tricky topics, I think, for any of us to try to deal with, even with people you agree with. And here we have a lot of people in the same space who are going to be sleep deprived, tired, hungry, and all of the above, tackling very challenging issues that they're all passionate about. As we wrap up our conversation on these two new lawmakers, I just want to take a step back and think about the big picture here. What are some of your takeaways from spending all this time with Representative Zokai?
I think from both Zokai and from what you've said about Johnson, I see a lot of optimism and really determination to get through the next few months and come up with some good policy for Colorado.
Yes, that's what I see too. And I really want to see how they feel when the entire legislative session is over. I mean, how many all-nighters? What do they think of the bills that passed or failed? The tenor of the discussion? Amendments? I mean, there's just so many aspects to this job.
I think, at least from my experience with Zokai, it's been a reminder that every lawmaker really has their own story. And these are just two out of the 98 other lawmakers at the statehouse. And each of them have their own stories that have informed why they're there and their own personal connections to these issues. I think sometimes the public can forget that these people are our neighbors.
One thing I learned is you always have to keep an open mind, and that's what we try to do in our jobs. And Representative Johnson mentioned this. She's 29 years old, but look at all the life experiences she's had and huge challenges that a lot of us have never had to go through. That, we can't do this episode on every single member in the State House, but I think if we did, we'd learn so much about what they're bringing to the Capitol.
I also don't think we can forget that these are individuals with a significant amount of power, though, and that they do need to be held accountable and that it is a privilege to hold this position. So I think all of these things can be true at the same time.
Yes, definitely. One thing that will be fun to do, when I talked to Representative Johnson earlier, she hadn't met Representative Zokai. And I don't know if they've chatted now or not, but when the session wraps up, it'd be fun to have them on the air and just have them reflect on everything.
That would be pretty fun. They can talk about how many all-nighters they pulled during the session, or how few.
And I want to see if Johnson does start her Instagram Dogs of the Capitol, whatever she decides to come up with. And does that help bridge the divide?
Well, I'll be on board with that one, that's for sure.
That's it for this episode. Purplish is a production of member-supported Colorado Public Radio and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
The CCNA is a collaboration between KUNC News, Colorado Public Radio, Rocky Mountain PBS, and the Colorado Sun, with support from news outlets throughout the state. Funding for the Alliance is provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Lucas Brady Woods.
And I'm Benta Birkland. Our producer is Stephanie Wolf. This episode was edited by Megan Verlee and sound designed and engineered by Shane Rumsey. Our theme music is by Brad Turner.
Purplish will be back in your feeds next week. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.